One.
Good morning, this is Daniel here with Cops and Cons TV. Today is going to be our live show that we do just about every single Friday. Now, this week we are doing it an hour early, so I want to thank everyone for joining in. And the way we're going to do this, like every week, is we're going to go over some of the most important and interesting police and legal cases that happened this week. So while we're going through these cases, if you happen to have questions or comments, or if you think I get something right or get something wrong, or maybe you just have another take about what we're talking about, put it in the comments, and definitely like to go back and forth with people during the comments live while we're doing the show, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. So again, like always, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do subscribe to Cops and Cons TV. That's way you know when we do these live shows, you'll know exactly when they're coming in. If you want to follow me, you can follow me at Police Law News over at YouTube, Substack, and TikTok, all those different channels. So a little bit of a roadmap of where we're going today. So I want to let people know kind of what cases that we're going to cover. So the first case that we're going to cover is the officer-involved shooting in Bristol, Connecticut. We're going to go over some of the new developments that happened there. Then we're going to go to a story that happened, just about a year ago in Indianapolis, Indiana. So it is an older story, but it's one of the officers involved has just been charged with federal charges. It's a case of excessive force that I think is really interesting. And it's one of those cases where if you watch this case and you don't think that the force is excessive, I'm going to say that you're not being honest. So we're going to get into that. Also, the Darrell Brooks case. So Darrell Brooks is the Waukesha, was the news about 12 hours ago is when I saw it. So there is some updates on some of the, we'll call it some of the fault with Uvalde. We've covered Uvalde so much, but it actually has been a couple weeks or a couple months since we've talked about it. But there have been some developments with some of the managerial and structural problems that have been discovered through investigation of this case. And then last but not least, we have what I call the trial of the century. So I'm going to leave that as a teaser for the end, but it is the absolute craziest lawsuit, most ridiculous lawsuit that's ever been filed. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that. Can you break, let's see, we do have a couple comments. Let's see. New Mexico exploring. Can you break down some New Mexico officer-involved shootings? Yeah, we have broken down officer-involved shootings from New Mexico. There was one from Las Cruces that we did with an older woman. We did that a couple months ago. And last week we actually broke down a case with an officer-involved shooting with the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office. So we broke down one of their officer-involved shootings. You can go ahead and watch those in our older episodes. But absolutely, we do cover officer-involved shootings that we think are interesting and have some substance to them one way or another in every single state. So again, thank you all for being here again. And so the first case that we're going to talk about is we did touch on it last week, but it was a little bit new. So this was a couple weeks ago in Bristol, Connecticut. Essentially, there was a call for service. It was in reference to a domestic dispute. Two brothers, they were both in their 30s, and there was a call for police that there was a domestic dispute at a house. 3 different police officers arrived to the house, and essentially, this was an ambush. One of the brothers, his name is Nicholas Brucher, he was actually in camo, and he was in the bushes, and he had an AR-15. As the police officers approached the house, they started to speak with his brother, Nathan Brucher. As they were speaking to Nathan, the other brother, Nicholas, started shooting at police officers. It was reported that he shot at police officers over 80 times. 2 police officers were tragically killed, Sergeant Dustin DeMonte and then Officer Alex Hamzy. They were both killed in the gunfire. There was a third officer there. His name is Officer Iriado, and he was actually shot in the leg. Despite being shot in the leg, he was able to find some cover and find some concealment back by his police car, and then he did engage in a gunfight, and he did kill the shooter, Nicholas Brucher. The brother, Nathan, who was the one who wasn't the one who was hiding, he was the one that officers were initially talking to, so he was shot as well. However, they really haven't been too up to date or given a whole lot of information on exactly what his injuries are. bar, but we know that the brother Nathan was also shot by police officers, and we know that he is in the hospital, though it's unsure exactly which charges he's facing, or if he was also a shooter, or if he was just a decoy. So we covered that last week, but there has been some new information. So what everybody wants to know is, what is the motive? So you have two brothers who, really don't have any real substantial criminal history. The shooter, Nicholas, who was hiding in the bushes, he is a divorced father, but he has two little kids. So what would make him all of a sudden decide to do this? So everyone wants to know what the motive is. And this might not help a whole lot, but some of the information that we've gotten recently is that apparently before this, Nathan and Nicholas were at a bar called Bleachers in Bristol, Connecticut. And while they were at the bar, there was some type of a disturbance, and there was a call for service in reference to disturbance, and police were called. So no one was, as far as we know, no one was arrested, no one was cited, but Nathan did have some contact with police officers earlier in the night at this bar. So that's just the new information we have. It's unknown if it's actually relevant or not, or if that's the reason for the officer-involved shooting, but there have been record requests for body camera video of any contact police officers had with them over at the bar, and also body camera footage from the officer-involved shooting. So we are going to post a link to some of the body cam footage. So what they've actually released so far is not the initial approach by police officers. It's essentially after the officer-involved shooting starts, Officer Uriado, once he retreats to his car, and then from that position, he then engages with a gun battle with Nicholas. It's at that point that the body camera footage is available. So we do have a video of that. It is uploaded into the chat if you want to check that out later. Now, I covered this on my channel earlier in the week, and there were some comments where people said, well, wouldn't it be better for police officers if AR-15s were banned? Meaning that, because the individual shot at police officers 80 times, they were pretty much outgunned right from the beginning, especially because they were caught by surprise. And, wouldn't it be safe if there was a ban on AR-15s? And I guess so. In a perfect world, I see where that makes sense. Meaning if we could go back, I don't know when the first AR-15 was made, but let's say 50 years. I don't know when. But let's say we can go back 50 years. If we had a crystal ball, we can say we are never going to make these weapons so that they are in the hands of civilians. Well, we could have that conversation. But right now, living in reality, there are over 100 million AR-15s in the United States. So putting any kind of a ban on AR-15s, it just wouldn't keep it out of the hands of dangerous people. So again, if you are going to violate the murder law, and if you are going to kill police officers, I don't see a situation where someone says, well, I really don't want to break this federal firearms law. I mean, if Hunter Biden doesn't care about breaking federal firearms laws, why would other violent maniacs? So that's kind of what I want to talk about there. Keep the families in your thoughts, because we did lose two police officers in this tragic case, and Officer Uriado, he was shot in the leg and he is still injured. So we'll keep an update on that. And then as soon as we get some more information, maybe about the motives, we will go ahead. And we do have some information. Looks like AR-15s were first introduced in 1956. So I said 50 years, Armalite rifles in 1956. So I said 50 years, closer to 70, but not too far off. So the next case that I want to talk about is in Indianapolis, Indiana. And we're going to post a link to that video as well. But this is a really interesting case. So it happened on September 24th of 2021 in Indianapolis, Indiana. The individual who was involved, his name is Jermaine Vaughn. So it looks like they're in downtown Indianapolis, and there's some type of call for service. Mr. Vaughn is a homeless man, and he was involved in some kind of a disturbance where I'm not sure exactly what the facts are, but the police officers on scene decide to place Mr. Vaughn under arrest for disorderly conduct. So they do. So they place Mr. Vaughn in handcuffs. Once he's in handcuffs, he does start to struggle and resist arrest a little bit. And one of the police officers who has him in handcuffs does a takedown and essentially gets him on the ground in order to get a better control of Mr. Vaughn. So up to this point, we really don't have any issues. We have an arrest, which, there's likely probable cause for that arrest. And then he's handcuffed and there's a takedown to the ground. After after he starts to actively resist. All of this seems reasonable. When he was taken to the ground, it wasn't in a real hard fashion. It seems like maybe they were just trying to get a better control of him. Maybe they were going to try to get leg shackles, just to do a couple things to make it so he was easier to control, so that police officers might be able to handle the situation in a more safe manner for not just the officers, but also for Mr. Vaughn himself. Now, here's where things just go absolutely awry, and I can't even explain why someone would do this. So Mr. Vaughn is on the ground, and we are going to post the video to this as well, but Mr. Vaughn is on the ground, handcuffed behind his back, laying on his back, so his face is looking up. While he's in that position, there's a sergeant. At the time, he was a 14-year veteran of the police department. His name is Sergeant Eric Huxley. He essentially walks over really quickly to Mr. Vaughn, lifts his left leg, and stomps on Mr. Vaughn's face with his boot. There's absolutely no reason to do this. There was no, at this point, Mr. Vaughn wasn't a threat. He wasn't spitting. His hands were behind his back. Even if he was spitting, that would not have justified this level of force. You can see that after this happens, Mr. Vaughn is pretty stunned. I mean, he seems like he's shocked. He does start to bleed from his face. And during this, he does say that this is police brutality, and he's correct. So this is something that absolutely should just never happen. There's no reason at all for this. If you watch the body camera footage throughout the rest of it, it seems like the sergeant kind of has an idea that maybe what he did just isn't correct or isn't the right thing, or that this could be problematic later on. And this isn't part of any official investigation yet. This is just him kind of talking to other officers on scene, and he essentially says that his stomping on Mr. Vaughn's face was an accident. The sergeant made a comment that, he was trying to put his foot on Mr. Vaughn's shoulder in order to just hold him down and keep him stable, but he accidentally stomped on his face with his boot. So if you watch the video, that is absolutely not correct what he said. Now, what the officer said in an internal affairs investigation or to criminal investigators, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he kept with that statement because that hasn't been made public. But again, at least on body camera footage, he seemed to be trying to justify his actions, maybe to the other officers so they didn't report him. Well, what ends up happening is that the police officer, 2 other officers did actually report him. The chief of police didn't find out about this incident until 2 weeks after it happened. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy there. The 2 officers who were with the sergeant, they claimed that they actually reported what happened. The chief of police has gone on the news and said, no. The only way that we found out about this is through a normal check during a use of force, any kind of use of force case or investigation, during just a regular check. We found this 2 weeks later. That's how it happened. Well, the 2 other officers who were with him have been placed on leave, and they have sued the department. Those 2 officers are claiming that they are being retaliated against the police department for reporting what the sergeant did. Now, the police chief has actually done a really good job about making the video public and saying, hey, we want to get out in front of this. This is what the sergeant did. It's not appropriate. It's not in line with any of our policies or values, and we're going to come out and essentially denounce this, which is absolutely what the police officer should do. So just that sergeant has been placed on leave, and also there's a criminal investigation. So a couple of the new developments this week and kind of why this case has, reemerged appropriately in the news is that he is facing 2 state-level charges. One for official misconduct, and the other state-level charge is for battery with moderate injury. Also, this past week, he was indicted on federal civil rights violations for violating rights and excessive force under the color of law. So the sergeant was just indicted on those cases. So employment law, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, how is he still employed? Why is he even still technically employed with the Indianapolis Police Department? Because he is. He hasn't been fired yet. So every state has different collective bargaining laws, meaning when it comes to individuals who have public employment and then, how they can be disciplined, terminated, fired. And I just want to say this, that it's always in the best interest of the city or the county or the state to follow those laws no matter what they are, because if they violate those laws, now let's just say for an example, let's say we can all agree that this, and just so you know, the sergeant, he has been pulled to the street, from the street. He's on administrative duty. He's not having any contact with the public. They yanked his gun and his badge in his car. So he's doing some type of administrative assignment. He isn't out there, doing traffic stops or anything like that. But let's say that we all agree that the end of this should be that the sergeant should be terminated. Well, if they don't follow the proper channels of investigation, of letting the sergeant know exactly what he's facing, and then go through those proper procedures by the state of Indiana law, and they fire him too early, even if the firing was technically good, for not following those procedures, the city could be sued for back pay, for reinstatement, and they might have to do some kind of a settlement. So if the goal is to actually terminate police officers who have done wrong and have violated serious policies, it always is in the best interest of the police department, the city, or the state to follow those employment laws in whatever state that is. So I think that's a reason to explain why the officer hasn't been fired yet. So a lot of times in a lot of states, I'm not saying it's the case for Indiana, that one of the ways that the officer can be fired, even before an investigation is done, is if they're indicted on a felony. So he was just indicted on a felony. So we'll see if that's one of the ways that the city is able to fire him. The chief has recommended termination. My guess is that what will happen, but there are people who are reasonably irritated that he hasn't been terminated yet, but there's some legal reasons for that. And again, it's always in the best interest of the state or the employer to follow those laws. And we'll have to see what happens with the retaliation claim from the other two police officers, because if they actually reported it, there should be some kind of a record. Did they write it in their police report? Did they file a separate independent internal affairs investigation form where they're requesting an investigation? Or did they send an email, a text message, or did they just verbally in conversation tell a different supervisor? So it'll be interesting to see what happened. The fact that the chief of police is saying that they didn't actually find out about it until 2 weeks later, that could be problematic. What also could have happened is the officers could have gotten wind, hey, this guy has an attorney, this is going bad, holy shit, we better report this now 12 days in. So is that something that's possible? Yes. So we're not exactly sure what happened, but those officers have filed claims of retaliation against the police department, and we'll keep updated on that to see exactly what happened there. But again, all three of those officers are currently on desk duty right now. We will link the video, watch it. It's actually pretty terrible. Okay, it looks like we have some comments. So Sergeant George, let's see. The stomp came from out of nowhere from Sergeant Huxley. Yeah, I know you're 100% correct. Like I said, he wasn't the officer who did the takedown. He was kind of standing like a lot of sergeants do. He's like an ancillary officer. He was there probably managing the scene. That's what a supervisor should be doing. But as soon as the individual was on the ground, he just like walks towards him in a quick fashion and just stomps on his face. And again, there was just no reason for that. Let's see. Kidding Me says, good old accidental face stomp. Yeah, exactly. And Kidding Me, yes. And a good old accidental face stomp will get you fired. You lose your pension, and you're charged with felonies, and you're going to do years in jail. That's absolutely what should happen. James says, calling it an accident doesn't take the fact that it happened. Absolutely. That's 100%. It doesn't. Now, I know we're going to do into Barack Obama's silly season here, but, let's say that it actually was an accident. No, it still happened. It would still have to be investigated. But if you watch this, there's absolutely no way that this was an accident, that he was trying to position his foot. No, he stomped down on the guy's head. Some more evidence to that is after it happened, he didn't say, oh my God, I'm sorry. I can't believe I did that. Are you okay? Nothing. He just started yelling at the guy, you're done, you're done. So I think he was irritated with the things that Mr. Vaughn was saying, but we have freedom of speech, and you can say irritating things to police officers if you want. Let's see. First, okay. Watching from Jersey. Hello. Okay, so no other comments about this case. Yeah, and his, not only was he saying, done, 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 you're done. I mean, the officer's job is done. He's going to do some time in prison, and he probably should. It's actually, I mean, like I said, it's one of those things where, one of the reasons that, I think it's important to be pro-police is because, at least I honestly believe that police officers are that separation between order and chaos. Essentially, society would be a lot worse, a lot more violent if there weren't police officers. But part of that is calling out when there's excessive force, when there is misconduct from police officers. So we have to call it out and we have to be honest about it. And yeah, this is one of those cases that I think it's important to highlight because the officer should absolutely face some consequences, and it looks like he's going to. So the next case that I want to talk about is the Darrell Brooks case. And, this is the case that it's a tragic case. It's from the Christmas parade last year in Waukesha, Wisconsin. You remember he was driving a red Ford SUV. He essentially drove it through the parade. He killed 6 people and injured 62. He has, in trial, in court, with all those charges, he's done some strange things. The trial's going on this week, and it's absolutely, the whole thing is just a circus. So he is representing himself as his own attorney. Some of the developments this week is that, and this has been going on since the beginning of the trial, is his claim that he's a sovereign citizen. So this actually gets pretty interesting and a little confusing because it doesn't make any sense. So let's just do a little bit of a tangent on sovereign citizens and why Darrell Brooks is saying some of the things that he says. So what sovereign citizens, including Mr. Brooks, what they believe is that there are 2 different types of people, that there are natural persons and that there are fictitious persons. And when you're born, you are born to be a fictitious person and you are given a fictitious name that is on your birth certificate, but conveniently, all fictitious people can decide to opt out of the fictitious world and become a natural citizen. Now, once you're a natural citizen, you don't have to have a driver's license. You don't have to follow laws. Essentially, you're sovereign. You've opted out of the system. You're out of the matrix. You've taken the red pill. You don't have to follow all these things. You don't recognize the government's authority over you. So that's their theory. Again, it doesn't make any sense. There's no legal basis behind it, but this is what these people think. That's why often when they're stopped by police officers, they don't have driver's license, registrations, insurance, is because they claim that they're just sovereign citizens, they're natural persons, and they're traveling, and that the government just doesn't have any control or authority over them. So one of those things that they do is, so on a birth certificate, here's one of the arguments they make, and one of the things that Mr. Brooks keeps saying is that on a birth certificate, your name is in capital letters. That's just how it is on a birth certificate. So what they say is that is your fictitious name. So what most people do is they change their name, they put a hyphen in or something to that effect where they said, that Darrell Brooks in all capital letters, that government name, that's fictitious. You can't charge me with anything because I'm not him. I'm actually Darrell Brooks where, except for the first letter, it's all lowercase. It's a different person. You're not even charging the right person. Also, sovereign citizens, they believe that only natural persons, so you have to be this higher level of human being, like Scientology, you have to be clear. So only these natural persons, they're the only ones who can file complaints against other people. So one of his issues is that the complainant in this case, the plaintiff, is the state of Wisconsin. So he keeps asking the judge, well, where's the state of Wisconsin? I want to question the state of Wisconsin. That's who's filing charges against me. And, the state of Wisconsin isn't a natural person. Therefore, you can't charge me with these crimes because there isn't a valid person who's complaining. So the judge has cited case law to Mr. Brooks, and really it just goes round and round. Again, he's been kicked out of his own trial multiple times, and what he keeps doing is he keeps causing a problem, a disturbance, arguing with the judge in front of the jury. And the judge really has a hard job because she wants to let Mr. Brooks say what he wants, but if he says things that are just too crazy and too extreme and arguing with the judge, that's going to make him look bad in front of the jury. And what the judge is reasonably afraid of is that if this goes to appeal, which you would think it would once he's convicted, if it goes to appeal, a good appellate attorney is going to say, so you let Mr. Brooks argue with you for on and on and on in front of the jury, well, that tainted the jury. That made Mr. Brooks look even more horrible than he actually is. So the judge keeps having to have the jury leave. As the jury's leaving, Mr. Brooks is screaming and yelling at the judge. One of the very interesting things this week is that not only is Mr. Brooks an alleged mass murderer, he's also acting as his own attorney. He's also an aspiring rapper. I mean, this guy has depth. He's a regular Renaissance man. So in one of his rap videos, he's a rap god. In one of his rap videos that he made prior to the alleged crimes, the vehicle, the red Ford SUV that he allegedly was driving when he mowed down a bunch of people and killed them during a Christmas parade for absolutely no reason, that vehicle is actually in one of his music videos. So we're gonna have to put a link to that inside the chat so you can see exactly what it is, but it's actually a crazy video. So when they play that, so the rap video was shared on Reddit when the crime happened, a few hours after it happened. So pretty much within a few hours, individuals on Reddit who knew who he was were the ones who actually shared it and kind of got it out there. So but Darrell Brooks actually got really mad. So he got really mad that the prosecution was trying to play this rap video. I guess he feels like he's, has matured and grown as an artist, and he would, really just want the prosecution to play a better song. So, but a video, some of his rap video, we are going to put in the chat so you can see it. Let's see. So. Yes, he didn't allegedly drive his SUV through a parade, my guy. I know. Until he's convicted, it is alleged, no matter how much evidence or how silly it sounds. So yes, it's but that's what's going on in the Darrell Brooks case. Like I said, it's been covered. I've been watching just about every day. It is. Sergeant George Court TV aired a live stream of the trial, to which I saw. Yeah, I've been watching the same thing. It's an interesting trial, and it just really shows that it's almost a wonder how he was found competent to stand trial, but he is. So, he is, I think it's pretty obvious to say, not trying to diagnose anyone, that there is some mental health problems there. But, he met the level of being, at least not insane for trial, competent for trial. Really all you have to show that you're competent for trial is that you understand the charges against you. So just because you have a mental illness, just because that mental illness obviously affects your thinking and your reasoning and your behaviors, if you have the capacity to understand the charges against you and to understand the consequences, that's it. That's all you need. So he is competent to that level. So we'll keep you updated on the Darrell Brooks trial. One of the things, so the state has essentially rested their case, and now it's his turn to call witnesses. So apparently there's some talk about whether or not he's going to call one of his ex-girlfriends who doesn't want to testify. So again, this will be interesting. What's his sentence gonna, Cam Allen? What's his sentence gonna be? Do you think? So I mean, I don't know if Wisconsin has the death penalty or not. I cannot remember. He'll get life in prison. So he killed 62 people, injured 62 more. My guess is he'll be convicted on every single count, and however many years it ends up being, 90, 100, 1,000, he'll spend the rest of his life in jail. That's what I think it'll be. Let's see. So would he actually call himself to the stand? So that actually happens. I know it seems like a silly thing, but when people are, so that's a good question. So what happens when people are representing themselves as an attorney, but they also want to be cross-examined as a witness because they were there. So typically the way this works out is wouldn't be like, a TV show from the 90s where you have the same person who stands where the attorney stands, asks a question, and then they have to run back and they sit where the witness sits. No. What it essentially would be, it would be Mr. Brooks just sitting up there and just talking. So he wouldn't have to ask himself questions. He would essentially just be able to go on and on and on and talk about whatever he wanted to talk talk about, and that's likely what would happen in a case like this. Let's see, Sergeant George, the fact that Darrell Brooks tried to pass himself off as a sovereign citizen during his trial was laughable, in my honest opinion. Yeah, it is actually ridiculous, yes. Let's see, Amita, that would be ridiculous if he questions himself. I would kind of like to see this. Let's see, anyone have any recommendations on YouTube channels with police body cam videos? I have a great recommendation for that. It's called Cops and Cons. It's a great channel for police body cam. Make sure that you go ahead and follow it. Let's see. Always Sunny in Pahoa. Since your title name is it's Always Sunny. It's Always Sunny. I watch Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and if you watch that show, you know that Charlie likes to fancy himself as a bird lawyer. So I just can't think that Darrell Brooks representing himself would be, almost as competent as Charlie would be representing himself in a lot of these cases. Okay, so the next case I want to talk about is Uvalde. So we all know what happened in Uvalde, Texas, and we really haven't talked about it in a couple. We actually haven't talked about it in a couple months, and that's because there really hasn't been any update. So since the chief of police, Pete Arredondo, since he was fired and terminated, there really hasn't been any news. But we know that there's all kinds of investigations that are going on in the background. So here's what hit the news in the last day or so, is that there is a captain from the Texas Department of Public Safety who has faced some criticism and is facing an internal investigation. Now, I just want to put it out there that just because this captain is facing an internal investigation doesn't mean that he did anything wrong. So I'm not saying he did anything wrong. He might have. I'm not saying he did, though. But you would think anyone who was on scene, who had any type of supervisor or managerial position in any of these police departments would be under internal investigation, okay? So even if there was no evidence they did anything, it's reasonable that everybody is going to be investigated for every decision they made. That's reasonable. I would be shocked and surprised if someone wasn't. So again, just because he's under internal investigation doesn't mean he did anything wrong. This is such a horrible incident. We need to find out what happened. But here's some of the criticism. So this captain acknowledges that he's a captain for Department of Public Safety, and Texas DPS is one of the ones who responded to the scene. Now, obviously, it was the Uvalde Police Department and the Uvalde Independent School District Police Department who were there first, but, Texas DPS did get there. Apparently, after they were en route to the scene, the captain, who wasn't on scene but was on the radio, he advised the officers who were responding to take up perimeter positions, essentially to not enter the building, but to take up perimeter positions. So let's think about that. So that isn't unreasonable. So if you're thinking about it from a position of management, and you have from this captain's position not being on scene, he probably thought that, whoever was there first, the first 10, 15, 20 minutes, they have all they need on scene. And the captain was likely thinking, okay, what else do they need? Perimeter positions. So, but it's a case like that is once you get there and you take up a perimeter, whoever is incident commander on scene, they're in charge. So they can absolutely say, hey, you three on perimeter, we need you over here. So that's something that routinely happens. But the initial order or command or direction to take up perimeter positions, that isn't an unreasonable thing to say. Just trying to think, okay, what else do they need in this situation? The cavalry's coming, how can we help? Again, knowing that the incident commander on scene, once cops are there, they can absolutely direct any cop from any agency to do whatever needs to be done. So I don't think that's unreasonable that he said this over the air, but he is being scrutinized for that. And, some of his thought process and exactly what he knew at the time when he made that directive, yeah, we need to find out what that was. But, that doesn't strike me as being incredibly unreasonable. Then one of the other criticisms that we see that, might be a little more serious is that they said that at 70 minutes in, so we all know that the police officers actually went in at 77 minutes, but at 70 minutes in, apparently he gave an order to DPS, so not to anyone else, he only had contact with the Department of Public Safety, is that this captain gave an order to Department of Public Safety officers to hold on the door, to not actually go in and enter, because he thought, or he had heard, or he had information that there was a more advanced and trained tactical unit that was en route and almost there. So he said that he made the decision that as long as they were there anyways, he told the officers to wait. Now, it's also saying that he also says in internal investigation that, yeah, even though I said this over there, no one listened. Like they still went in. He also didn't have the information that the Border Patrol team BORTAC, that they were on scene as well, which is, essentially that higher level of tactical force. So he didn't have that information, but it seems like the people who were on scene didn't listen to him anyways. Also, this was 70 minutes in. Listen, if we're going to get mad at someone for making a bad decision 70 minutes in, then we need to get mad at people who also made bad decisions the first 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes on scene as well. So if there is blame for this captain, and I'm not saying that there isn't, he is way down the list of people who are blamed. And just to recap about Uvalde really quick, kind of what my thoughts are is, when it comes to the officers who responded, and the whole thing was a mess. It was absolutely terrible. It was not within training of what police officers are supposed to do for active shooters. But I kind of break it down to 3 different categories of police officers. The first category of police officers are the first officers who were initially there. So whether or not, how much blame do we put on them because they were initially there, I think they probably have a whole lot of blame. So is those officers who were there. Now, officers who arrived on scene within the first 2 minutes, well, I think that's different than officers who arrived 20 minutes later because, they don't have all the information. But I think we can assign a pretty high level of blame to the first initial officers who were in there. And then how about the managers? So the police managers or supervisors who were there on scene, like Pete Arredondo, I think that's where most of the blame is. Because again, if you have a police officer who arrives 8 minutes in, if you have a chief of police who's already on scene, who's giving you orders, they have more information than you, they have more command than you. The reason why police departments are paramilitary organizations is because unless the order is illegal, you are supposed to listen to your supervisors. So, the police managers, that's where the managers who were on scene, that is where the absolute most of the blame should be. And then we have the third group of officers who've been criticized a lot, and I'm going to say unfairly. It's the officers who are on the perimeter. So there's all kinds of videos of police officers on perimeters who are essentially stopping parents from going in. Now, I've covered this before, but just really quick. So what the police officers were doing was following police policy and procedure. Okay, so I just want to say, if we're going to criticize, and we should, the initial officers inside the building, if we're going to criticize them for not following policy and training when it comes to an active shooter, then we also have to hold other officers for either following or not following policy. So essentially, the officers who were maintaining the perimeter, here's what they knew. They knew that there were 20 cops inside with an active shooter. Obviously, in 2020 hindsight, they would have no way to know how awful it was actually going inside, but all they know is they have an active shooter and 20 other cops are inside. They are preventing other people from entering a building where there's an active shooter. That is within training, that's within procedure, and that is reasonable. You have to think about it this way, whether it's a grocery store, whether it's a library, whether it's a school. If there is someone actively shooting people, police officers having the lawful objective to keep other innocent people from going in there, like that's a reasonable thing that we should want police officers to do, right? I mean, it just is. Now, of course, the optics and the emotions look bad when we know how bad it actually went inside, and that it's parents trying to rescue their kids. So the optics of it are absolutely horrible, and an emotional argument would be to criticize the police officers, but we look at what they were actually going to do. So I ask you, if you don't like what the police officers did, what policy would you create to make things better? So how would you want police officers to act? So let's say there's an active shooter at a grocery store. So you want police officers to allow random shoppers and other people inside. So, I mean, how would that affect, again, you have police officers who are trying to go after, in typical active shooter cases, not in Uvalde, but you have police officers who enter a building who are essentially hunting down an active shooter, having 5, 6, 7, 30 random people rushing in all crazy. Is that going to make the situation better or worse in general? So again, if you criticize what the police officers did on the perimeter, I would like to know what policy would you put in place to make this better overall. And when you make police policies, you kind of have to make it general for every situation. So I'm curious to see what people's thoughts are on that as well. Let's see, Sergeant George, the fact that somebody gave orders to the DPS trooper to stand down in the midst of an active shooter fiasco is ridiculous in my honest opinion. It is absolutely ridiculous. So we have to know what the DPS captain who gave that command what he knew at the time. So did he have communications with, so, and what I'm going to say is probably because you're a smart guy, I know what Sergeant George is thinking. He's going to say, well, hey, if you weren't on scene and it's an active shooter, if you don't know what's going on, why the hell are you giving any orders in the first place? So that's what I would say, just as a coverall. Why are you telling people what to do if you weren't there? So let's see. Always Sunny. Let's see. I can assure you this will not work in mainland United States. You'll get arrested anywhere. I'm not sure. Okay. I would read your comment, but it's not really in context, so I can get to it. I can get to it later. Okay. So that's the kind of the update on the Uvalde case, which, you know, we'll keep updated on that. We'll let you know kind of where the blame lies, because it's just so important to figure out where were the problems, where were the mistakes, and how do we fix it so it doesn't happen again. Okay, so the last case that I want to talk about, it's the trial of the century. It's George Floyd's family versus Kanye West. So the family of George Floyd has just filed, or is going to file, a $250 million lawsuit against Kanye West. So I guess we'll call him Ye West. So this lawsuit stems from a podcast. So he was on Kanye West was on a podcast called Drink Champs podcast. During that podcast, somehow, within the first few minutes of the podcast, they got on a non-controversial topic of the murder of George Floyd. So while they were talking about this, Kanye West gave his opinion that it wasn't actually police brutality that killed George Floyd, but it was the level of fentanyl that he had in his system. So it's that statement, that comment, that opinion is what is sparking this lawsuit. Essentially, the family for George Floyd is saying that this has caused a couple things. First of all, it's defamation of character, and second, that it is causing intentional emotional distress for the family of George Floyd, and in particular, his daughter. So let's break this down a little bit. So Kanye West said that it's his opinion that. So let's see what the possible charges are, okay? So it would be a civil case. This isn't criminal. So defamation of character. So for the attorney to even mention defamation doesn't make any sense, because in order for there to be defamation of character, under the umbrella of defamation of character, there's libel and slander. So in order to essentially be a victim of libel or slander or defamation, you have to have a living victim. So if someone is deceased, then you have to have a living victim for this. So the family members of George Floyd's family, essentially they don't have standing. They don't have a right to claim to be victims of defamation on behalf of someone else. So when it comes to defamation, that's absolutely ridiculous. That isn't something that could happen because George Floyd is deceased. Now the second is a little more interesting. It's intentional infliction of emotional distress. So, I mean, in order to do that, you basically have to show that what the individual said was just so absurd that it was intentional with malice. So they did it on purpose in an attempt to try to harm someone emotionally. And what they said is so far outside the bounds of what we would consider accepted decency. Okay, so what Kanye West said outside the bounds of accepted decency? Well, what did he say? He said that he believed, it was his opinion, that George Floyd died due to fentanyl and not due to police brutality. Okay, well, I mean, that may not be correct. Obviously, a jury disagreed with what Kanye West said, because they found Derek Chauvin to be guilty. The prosecutor also disagrees. Well, how about the defense attorney for Derek Chauvin? So if you look at what the defense attorney for Derek Chauvin said, it's pretty much exactly what Kanye West said. Okay, well, a defense attorney is supposed to represent people. Well, who else said this? How about the medical examiner from the state of Minnesota? The medical examiner from the state of Minnesota said it was in handwritten notes and also in testimony that if George Floyd was found at home deceased with this level of fentanyl in his system, that they likely would have called it a drug overdose. Now, that medical examiner went on to say that yes, the level of fentanyl that George Floyd had in his system, yes, it could be enough to kill a person, but we are not saying definitively that this is what killed him. So, I mean, obviously this is an expert for the prosecution. It's a prosecution witness, but He always, but again, he said it's possible that the fentanyl could have killed him, but that wasn't his finding, that the fentanyl killed him, even though it is absolutely possible. So I think the amount of fentanyl that Mr. Floyd had in his system at the time of his death was 11 nanograms / milliliters. And they say that, what's considered the lethal dose, that means, what would kill a normal person. So what would, I've never had fentanyl before. So, what would kill me, fentanyl, and it's 0.3 nanograms. So he had, just about, between 3 and 4 times that in his system. Now, George Floyd was 250 pounds. He was 6'7", and he was a regular and habitual fentanyl user, so he has a higher tolerance. James, would Kanye be able to claim that he was simply misinformed? Can he say he was given wrong information? Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question. He absolutely can say that, but he probably won't even have to get there because he, like I said, his opinion to start off with, the first element of this would be, you would have to say that, what he said, is it so outside the bounds of what we would consider decency? Well, if it's a legal argument that a defense attorney made and backed up by at least one medical examiner, and there's another medical examiner who said something very similar. So we have a defense attorney making a legal argument, and we have 2 medical examiners who are basically saying this. Kanye West is basically saying, I agree with the medical examiners. Yes, other people could agree. So it's essentially, it's his opinion. So you cannot get in trouble or sued or be successful in a lawsuit for intentionally inflicting emotional distress if you're saying an opinion. People are allowed to have opinions. They could be bad opinions. They could be stupid opinions. And just when it comes to free speech, and I know that, free speech is the people use that term, and, really it's protection against the government. So this isn't a typical First Amendment issue, meaning that the government isn't coming against Kanye West and going to throw him in jail. This is a civil lawsuit from a private individual, but just the concept of free speech, I think it's interesting to think about because when it comes to free speech, really the only time that the defense of free speech matters when it's speech that you don't like. If it's speech that you agree with, if it's talking about your side of politics or an issue, well, that's really easy to defend. There's no challenge there. The challenge of this, the importance of this, is to defend speech that you don't agree with. So I think this is probably the most ridiculous, and the lawsuit hasn't been filed, but the attorney has been making the rounds saying that he's going to file it. If this lawsuit is filed, it's probably going to be one of the most ridiculous lawsuits that has ever been filed. Let's say Butter Cakes Babe. Let's see, yours said, that's his opinion. You can't sue over what opinion is, or can you? No, you can't. That's a really good question. So the last time that I kind of talked about this was with Kyle Rittenhouse. So Kyle Rittenhouse versus Whoopi Goldberg, the previous trial of the century. So, Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar made some comments about Kyle Rittenhouse, and they on The View, and they basically said that, that they thought he should have been guilty. So they said that they disagreed with the verdict of the jury. And a lot of people, and I'm of the opinion that the use of force that Kyle Rittenhouse used was reasonable. It was in defense of his life. He did not commit a crime. In my opinion, is that jury verdict was 100% correct. Now, so I disagree with Joy Behar and Whoopi. So I disagree with Joy Behar and Whoopi, but just because, so I think that they have bad opinions, which is really the whole point and focus of The View, is to just have people who don't know anything give really bad opinions. But I disagree with Whoopi and Joy Behar's opinions, but they're allowed to have those opinions. They're allowed to say, I looked at this case, I looked at the evidence, I think they should have found him guilty. So that's what they're saying. So, you people are, I was going back and forth with people on my channel for weeks, it seems like, after Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty, because they were saying that he was going to be able to sue LeBron James and Whoopi Goldberg. He isn't, because people are allowed to give opinions even if they're wrong and bad. And yeah, I honestly think that Court TV is just chomping at the bit. They can't wait for the live stream rights to the trial of the century of Kanye West versus the George Floyd family. So that would be great for television. That would be great for Cops and Cons TV. But on a real level of, should lawsuits be filed? Absolutely not. It definitely shouldn't. Let's see, James, if they file a lawsuit for Kanye, they would have to sue every other person in the world that thinks the same thing, since they think the same thing as Kanye, basically thinking out loud. Yes, but the problem is that Kanye West actually has $250 million. Most of us don't. So attorneys aren't going to waste their time. So it's, let's see. Yeah, so like I said, the lawsuit should never be filed because it's absolutely ridiculous. So those were the cases that I wanted to talk about and go over today. Again, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for coming in. And let's see, hang on. The lawsuit for defamation is going to crash and burn. Sergeant George, you are 100% correct. So anyways, I just want to thank everybody for coming in. You had really good questions and comments. We'll be back next week, probably around 11 o'clock Mountain. But follow Cops and Cons TV. Make sure you subscribe so you know exactly when we're coming on. Again, if you want to go follow my channel, which I do daily content, it's over at Police Law News at YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, Substack. I hope everybody has a safe weekend, and we will see you next week.